Welcome to School and Around, a podcast hosted by Branching Minds, featuring prominent leaders, subject matter experts, and thought innovators with their perspectives on the current challenges facing K-12 education. I am your host, Larissa Napolitan, a former teacher, instructional coach, and a member of the Branching Minds team, here to lead conversations and to shine a light on phenomenal educators and those that are on a mission to transform our schools and the lives of students. I am excited to share that we have launched our 2024 listener survey, and we can't wait to hear from you. All you have to do is simply click the link in the show notes, answer a few questions, and you'll be entered into our end of year giveaway. Your insights are invaluable as we plan episodes for 2025, ensuring that we continue to deliver great MTSS content and engaging guests. Now for today's episode. Today, we're talking about turning your MTSS vision into reality and aligning it with your district's strategic plan. I'm thrilled to be joined by an incredible panel of experts. First, we have Dr. Barbara Jenkins, former superintendent of Orange County, Florida. During her 10 years of leadership, she achieved remarkable milestones, including a 97% high school graduation rate and being named Florida Superintendent of the Year in 2017. Next, we have Dr. Mary O'Mara, superintendent of the Plainview-Old Bethpage Central School District in New York. Mary brings over 20 years of experience and a deep commitment to implementing effective MTSS practices. And finally, we have Karen Castle, a seasoned educational leader with decades of experience supporting districts in building sustainable MTSS frameworks. Karen has been a key part of the Branching Minds team for the past 8 years. So we welcome you, panelists. And I can't wait to hear your insights and stories. So we're just going to dive right in. Karen, I'm just going to let you take it away.
I'm proud to be here with these two great gals today. So we are going to talk about really making your MTSS vision a reality today and how involved that vision is in really being driven by a district strategic plan and the power that happens when they dovetail together. So these are kind of the buckets of things we're really going to talk about. We want to talk about leading change through these goals, through districts' goals and the process of building that buy-in and leveraging across a district. And then thinking about implementation science and how that impacts all the things that we try to do in our districts. Again, using MTSS data in all the ways that it informs our practice and creating strong communication habits and practices. And so just for a minute, an overview of MTSS, which may be just sorely redundant, but I never shy away from an opportunity to talk about this wraparound culture of MTSS. And as I said, I've worked with districts all over the country and for a good long time now. And a lot of districts approach MTSS as if it were a program that, fits in with the other programs that are being implemented. And, we really think at Branching Minds, we think that multi-tier system of support is bigger than that. It really provides a foundational framework for all of the teaching and learning that happens for all students in the school district. And so it wraps around academics, behavioral health, attendance, just all the components that make for a successful student in our schools. And so it requires infrastructure. And when we start talking about infrastructure, we're talking about all the departments in a school district that have a part in providing this service, this culture of support. I like to talk about, too, that we're not just talking about how we support kids, our students, but we're also thinking so much about, and you're going to hear this from Mary and Barbara, about how do we support the educators in our system so that they have a system of support just like, the students have. So we wanted to just put that out there and, just start framing our thinking in a big way of the infrastructure of MTSS. And Barbara, you and I, we started this work a while ago, and I know I found it really so difficult to maintain the work. We were great at starting the work, but keeping it going and knowing what everybody was doing was difficult. Did you find that to be true as well?
So we did, Karen, and I have to tell you, when you consider how many years have passed since response to intervention was first
Yeah.
brought on the scene, and then MTSS sort of as an improvement, more holistic approach to
Mhm.
taking care of our students' needs, a lot of years have passed. And if you consider the technology that's available today and the artificial intelligence that can actually make teachers' work easier, we've just come a long way. But in Orange County, it was back in 2006, we really started getting serious about tracking data. A response to intervention certainly included that. And then we moved on and were just intense about data notebooks, data walls, walking classrooms, reviewing where every child is. And the truth is, you really can't improve if you don't see the data and where you are. And so it was a wonderful strategy and a wonderful time, but it was also exhausting. I have
Yeah.
to say, so many of the results were because of phenomenal teachers and principals and their determination to stay on top of that data without the kind of technology that would have made their lives easier back then. We won the Broad Prize because we were able to move all student achievement by 2012. And then we also were able to narrow our gaps. And it was largely due to this notion of tracking data and being responsible and planning how you're going to improve that data. That was just the way we lived. My district used to call me the data queen because I don't want to hear what your gut is telling you. I don't want to think, I don't want to hear what you're thinking. I want to know what is the data telling us. Florida actually did name me data district leader of the year back then, but my folks shortened it to data queen
Yeah.
because we have to see what the numbers are telling us if we want to improve and if we want to see significant movement of our children and their outcomes. So we were using notebooks and spreadsheets and self-created means of tracking all of that before the onset of artificial intelligence and companies like Branching Mind. It's really in the forefront of making teachers' lives easier. But our commitment did not change over that time, and I largely attribute our success to the hard work of our staff members, as well as
Mm.
this notion of tracking the data to drive the work. Cannot be stressed enough. I also want to mention, Karen, that I don't want to pretend that data tracking alone is enough. If we are not careful about really good tier one instruction and core
Mhm.
instruction driving our students' outcomes, then we are missing the mark as well. You can't have core instruction that meets a very small percentage of your
Right.
students' needs, and then everyone else moves to tier two and to tier three. That's not the way it's designed to work. So we also need to work on really quality materials and core instruction. And then the data tracking is going to help drive our mission and our vision.
Right, right. Yeah, that just made my head hurt a little bit just thinking about those days of, which spreadsheet and did you update and oh my gosh, who deleted that? And yeah, it was just fragile, wasn't it? It was just fragile. And this work is difficult. So, Mary, and then thinking about you in the last few years there at Bethpage, and the initiative really that you guys have started. Talk a little bit, if you would, about that process of deciding about MTSS and then starting to think about change.
I appreciate that. I just want to, I chuckled, Barbara, when you were sharing of, I don't want to hear about your feelings. One of the benefits of bringing branching minds to the forefront, meaning all of our data lives in one student management system, it really gave credence to teachers' feelings about a student. Their experiential knowledge enabled them to know something's something needs a little extra attention here. But now it almost acknowledges you are right on with that teacher, and it's not, I'd be accused too of being a data queen. So I won't let the word be said. I call it student information now because data has become a bad word. But really, and I think, we all, when you have that level of experience as a classroom teacher, it's like, I don't need your spreadsheet. I know this child's struggling with name that. And here's what I've been doing to be successful in moving that. So here in Plainview-Old's Bethpage, we had an RTI plan, and that was a mandate out of New York State. So we were very familiar with what the foundation of that was, that you had to have a core instruction, you had to have universal screeners, and you had to have tiered interventions. But unfortunately, it was only geared toward kindergarten through fourth grade and toward literacy. So we knew, particularly here in this district coming out of the pandemic, there was more than just literacy that needed to be addressed with our students. And our motto here is every student matters, every moment counts. So how do we make sure every student is on a schedule of being seen holistically, not just for academics and not only reading, but the other content areas, along with their social emotional well-being, their behaviors, and their attendance. So we had spreadsheets for everything too. We had our literacy coordinator with her spreadsheets, our math coordinator with another, our assistant principals with attendance spreadsheets, our counselors with the behavior. And we started to hear from the teachers that I'm being asked to put data in way too many places. So we really were very fortunate. We struck upon, through a Google search, Branching Minds. And I'm like, this really could answer that. And because Branching Minds uploads a lot of our data, teachers just have a dashboard now that they can look at, and they can see the whole child in those buckets of academics, attendance, behavior, social, and emotional. And because of RTI, many of our elementary teachers and leaders understood the building blocks for an MTSS plan. Our bigger challenge became secondary, where that was very different. Most of our secondary courses and departments are siloed. So we knew we had to do something a little bit larger and did it via a strategic plan. Part of our strategic plan made a priority of developing a district-wide MTSS plan from kindergarten through 12th grade. And that was adopted by the Board of Education. So they have year after year allocated resources toward the goals in our strategic plan. So MTSS did get the forefront, and it was publicly discussed, approved. The MTSS plan was approved, and it was done with multiple stakeholders, the development of that plan in partnership with Branching Minds.
Yeah. And Mary, how did you go about, really getting that buy-in? I know, elementary had a little bit of a head start, but again, this involves other departments, within your district, and whether that be, gifted education, whether it be, the counseling department or whatever. How did you begin to build just a cohort of champions around MTSS and thinking of it as a system level change, not just a kind of add on to RTI?
Absolutely. Yeah, great question and description. It wasn't an add-on to, it was really treated as something brand new. We had a district-wide committee comprised of all those different stakeholders, counselors, teachers from all levels. We had administrators on it. But in tandem with the committee writing the plan, we tucked in professional development along the way. So we had presenters come and present data. We had Branching Minds showing us the dashboard of how we could operationalize these ideas coming out of the committee. And then the year that the plan was being built, we did an incredible amount of professional development with our leaders. And we soon came to know we needed a leader of that work. So we were very fortunate with the board being supportive of a plan that looked at every student throughout the year using the same lens, not just this teacher thinks the child's progressing in this building, but across town in another building, there's a different set of criteria to assess the progress of a student. We created a position, an executive director of MTSS, who also is the chief information officer. So this is the person that has all the district data And she was brought on board in the second year when the plan was adopted to lead the rest of the work. And it was something, because it was so public, it was a district committee, it was a plan adopted by the Board of Education, and we hired a leader of it. It clearly communicated like this wasn't going away. This wasn't a superintendent going to a flea market and, oh, this is a nice new tool to buy. Let's try it out in my district. And when you get rid of me, there'll be someone else with their new tool. So, and then we really, in the spring, planned what the professional development plan would be for all teachers and leaders in the subsequent year. So of their choices, 6 hours had to be related to learning about the MTSS processes and the platform together.
Yeah, and both of y'all, do you think that teachers, all staff, began to see the connection between the MTSS protocols and achieving your strategic goals of literacy, math, whatever those academic and behavioral community goals were?
I would say absolutely, Karen. In fact, the whole notion of having a very public strategic plan and a dashboard that was tracking on student progress focused everyone's attention on how critical it was for our young people. I think you also have to acknowledge it's about the same time that teacher unions and others were starting to feel the stress and the pressure of high stakes accountability and what was going to happen to their jobs and their livelihood if they did not move student progress.
Right.
And so during that era, we certainly tried to relieve teacher stress and pressure around it, but it meant a lot of work on their part. And prior to artificial intelligence, it was about the best we could do. And so our teachers did a yeoman's job, but it was under this pressure that if those numbers don't move, then your employment, your livelihood under a high stakes accountability system are really at risk. And so I can't stress enough how we have worked harder in the past few years to relieve some of that stress, some of that tension, some of that pressure around high stakes accountability. How do we make teachers' jobs easier? If we want to stem the turnover and if we want more to come into our profession, it is critical that we work in that realm. But the need for the data and the consistency of tracking and improving student achievement uh, has not gone away, nor will it go away in the near future.
Yeah. And Mary, we, in our conversations, you mentioned too the idea of improved collaboration with your teachers. And so I think I'm thinking and knowing from my conversations with folks that increased collaboration through MTSS relieves that individual pressure that a teacher feels for the success of her kids. Kind of bringing that this is about we're all responsible for all of our kids. And MTSS is a way that we organize ourselves around that. Have you seen that happen as you have gotten deeper into work?
Yeah. So we're in our second year with Branching Minds, and I appreciate what Barbara said. New York has an interesting political movement and opt out where if students don't take the high stakes test, there's no really way to measure. But also, and I'm sure most on the meeting today would understand, by the time we get that data back from a large state assessment season, we're already into another school year already, and those kids have moved on to their other teacher. I think it's more impactful locally for us because teachers, through efforts that they decide in their individual meetings with either their grade level partners or in their department meetings, when they decide on a course of action to address a potential weakness or a plateau of growth, when they see movement, it really affects their efficacy in a positive way. It's very hard to be a teacher waiting for a state assessment result to say, did I move the needle? So having, the system of communication within the plan, which I know we'll talk about later, where, teachers can sit in a faculty meeting and say, wow, my individual effort contributed to the school's numbers that are up on the screen right now. But more importantly, I get to take the school's number and see where are my kids on that spectrum of success, or, do I have a larger percentage of a certain subgroup that just didn't move this much during this season, which is 3 times a year as opposed to annually.
Right, right. Yeah, and I know, we've talked about, just the role of superintendent, in this work and, leading this change, whether it be, really setting out that link between MTSS and the strategic plan or what have you. Um, and I want to go ahead and go to this and thinking about, what is our implementation going to look like? What can we set, as our adoption plan? And, within that science, we know that there are drivers of the work. And so, how did you go about, Mary, thinking about what the important drivers were of moving this work forward? And then, what kind of stages did you think about? How are we going to actually realistically, but with urgency, move, where we want to be by what time?
Great. We did a needs assessment, and during one of the superintendent's conference days, teachers had to do a self-assessment of their knowledge of MTSS, which really opened our eyes, even among our administrators, what they knew and didn't know about it. So those were the drivers. And then, we're here for students, and you feel pretty ineffective if you just realize there's a large group of folks who aren't familiar with tiered interventions, progress monitoring, applying a research-based intervention, not what you think is best. So we realized those were gaps. So we set about an implementation timeline, which we've really held steady to. And our teachers and our administrators really demanded that. They wanted to know, where are we going with this? And what am I going to be expected to learn during this time period while I do my other job, and which is my primary job, and teach the curriculum and, manage students throughout 181 days. So we were very good. And this is where our director, our executive director, has been amazing. She set out timelines, and we're reminded of those timelines regularly. And at the end of the year, we're able to say, like, where were we? And it informs the next year's, which we're in now, timeline, which really is fair to our faculty and our admin. They see there's a longer term plan. And we were very realistic to folks. We said, this is not going to come on this year and we'll be done this year. This is definitely a 3 to 5 year plan. And it's going to take 5 to 7 years before we're really moving, in the cycle of, plan, act, review, and then plan some more.
Yeah. Yeah.
I like that. I like that. I like that point, Mary. And Karen, I would add, from the superintendent's perspective, all across the country, we know if the superintendent is not the chief visionary officer, if it doesn't come from the very top of the organization, then you can't expect a plan to stick. What Mary is doing is phenomenal, but it starts at the top. And then you have to bring others along. If you are trying to lead, if you want to go fast, you go alone. If you want to go far, you go together. And so if you look behind you and nobody else is following you, that's not leadership. Strategic planning in general has got to be inclusive in the building of it. And I mean, it needs to be co-owned by the superintendent and the school board, not just the superintendent. And then you have to bring along your teachers, your staff, your leadership team, all of your employees. And then you want to certainly make sure your community is aware as well. And so that they are in supportive of, here's what we're planning to do for our children. It needs to be a living document that helps drive the focus for the district, not a document that goes on the shelf and collects dust. And the superintendent is critical for driving that vision and keeping it in the forefront if you want to see something accomplished. It could be MTSS or other initiatives that you have in place. It is critical for the superintendent to lead.
Right.
Barbara, that's it's such a great point, because you also have to really understand it. Karen, your point earlier that a lot of people think MTSS is a program. I remember some of the earlier things we had to quickly dispel, like, oh, we're doing this branching minds thing. I'm like, no,
Yeah.
no, no, no. And I appreciate what you said, Barbara. It's so important. You know the work well. Clearly, you had your, you were doing it a little earlier before the technology, but you had facility with the data and why it was being used and what it meant. You can't just delegate this. You have to know the work to do the work with the people who are going to build it with you.
And I don't want to leave out teacher unions because they are critical as well. We had to negotiate and talk with our teacher unions around this notion of having common planning time.
Anytime, yeah.
And while it was a bit of a struggle, it was sort of unheard of initially. It's very familiar to districts and sort of an expectation at this point. But the notion of teachers getting together to collaborate, to look at data, to plan, and to use that data to grow student outcomes was just unheard of initially. And so we had to have union cooperation and convince them also that this is going to make your outcomes better and make your life easier. And I'll speak to making your life easier through AI later on. But I just think
Yeah.
we have to acknowledge that
Yeah.
bringing our teacher unions along in districts where there is a necessity for that is important as well.
Barbara, that's so important because what we had to look at, we knew before bringing this in what units didn't have the time that we owned. And I know that sounds kind of harsh, but you had to know if we were giving teachers something else to do, we had to know they had a time in their day that could get done and not compete with other things they needed to do. So we actually, at the elementary level, they had common planning time. And with a high school schedule, there is that, but you're not going to get all the teachers. Our middle schools, we had to collectively bargain to be able to prescribe some of their planning time just to have the meetings around the work they were doing more informally with their teams. But at least we knew we could support what we were asking them to do with that time.
Right. And there have been districts that I've worked with, that we knew that those would be issues. And it's like, would you please bring the union rep to these meetings? That would be wonderful to have them part of this planning process, so that might be a little risky, but in the situations where, we invited, that just opened a door of, this is really all of us trying to get on the same page to build things that are best for kids. And for them to see teachers in that planning, visioning kind of space, and to see where their heart is and their dreams are, and not to kind of quash that, for union's sake or what have you. So yeah, that's good. And I can just sense people writing down some of these things that y'all have been saying, these clever little reminders of our focus as leaders. So I think another thing that we want to talk about is, again, how do we go about in the strategic planning process? And Barbara, you spoke about this a lot. How do we make sure that throughout that document, that living document that you mentioned, that there are checks and balances on what we envisioned, as our goal? And so how do we make sure that we have certain metrics that are going to guide our adoption? And so Barbara, when you guys worked and were awarded the board prize, how did you go about setting those adoption milestones, and did you have to adjust those along the way? Did they vary, whether it was this school, that level, what have you?
Absolutely, Karen. In fact, strategic planning needs to include, in our opinion, an actual living live dashboard so that milestones are set. If you want to be at a certain level in 3 years, in 5 years, then you need to break those down in increments and actually have them part of your tracking and progress monitoring. And so we were religious about progress monitoring. It just was not an option, pretty intense. I worked in a couple of different districts, and one of them, we actually used to call it the tribunal, because you were going to have to, on a regular basis, come before this group, the tribunal, and have to give an accounting of how you progressed in your particular area and what the outcomes are looking like. Are we tracking positively? Do we need to adjust? What are the resources that need to be adjusted if we're not going to make those goals? You certainly can't wait until the end of the year and say, oh, you know what, we didn't make
Make
those
it.
goals. Try again next year. The progress monitoring, continuous improvement is critical. And that's what we did through our strategic plan. It has to be a living document with milestones that are set and that are tracked and adjusted if they need to be adjusted. I tell folks, I don't want to see a dashboard with everything in the green. That means we're not pushing hard enough. But if everything is in the red, we're not being realistic. And so I
Mhm.
like progress monitoring and regular check-ins for everyone in the organization, not just for student outcomes and teaching and learning, but also every area of the organization is regularly tracked and monitored for the goals that are going to help make the entire district successful. And by the way, that dashboard should be online so anyone in the public, all of your employees, everyone can look at that same dashboard.
Yeah, your strategic plan dashboard. Yeah, great. Yeah. Yeah, so, Mary, as you were thinking about, this, adoption process, what considerations did you make, in your context?
With regards to the data and setting benchmarks, we had to
Yeah,
work with the group in the committee to talk about, elementary, we have clear cut, and we used the RTI bell curve, like you said, Barbara, you don't want everyone in the green, you don't want everyone in the red. And we needed a district wide metric to say, what is the percentage? So, we did 80% as, the bell curve determines. But more importantly, the universal screening tools, what were going to be the cut points, so that when we stopped and measured at this time, who met it, who didn't meet it, who's close, who's way exceeded. And it was easier to do at the elementary all the way up through 8th grade. We had already had in place NWEA as a screener for math and reading. At the primary levels, we had Ames Web. So you have national norms related to that. The more difficult thing was the high school. What were we going to use? And at the time, we didn't have universal screeners. We had state assessments that not everyone had to take, depending on the type of diploma that they were going toward. So we opted in year one to do the grade point average, which wasn't great, but we just thought at least we have some screening tool to say if 90% of the students in 9th grade math had an 80 or higher, who were the 10% that didn't? And at least it gave us some sort of direction. In year two, which was part of the strategic planning, we moved away from midterms and we went to quarterly assessments. That is something this year we will use. And, they're curriculum based measures, but everyone's taking it who's taking the course. And honestly, it will give our teachers, we haven't given the first one yet, the first quarter's not over yet. They'll just have something that just is a little more relevant to what they were teaching in the past 10 weeks, as opposed to waiting for a year in state assessment.
right, right. Yeah, and so I can hear that adoption being, adjusted depending on where people were starting from. The elementary had some things in place, the secondary, not the same kinds of measurement tools in particular. And we see that across the country, a real need for some skill-based secondary assessment products, and and then not to leave the content behind, which most high schools lead with and are reluctant, to back off of that at all, and they probably shouldn't. But yeah, so I love to hear how your metrics for implementation, really are differentiated. And what I hear throughout what y'all have been sharing is that the same continuous improvement strategies that we want teachers to use in a classroom, we're modeling now at the district level as we're continuing to grow and improve as a district. And I love hearing that, and knowing that teachers see that on a regular basis, so that it becomes very normal, to go through that continuous process, kind of cycle. And this is one of Dr. Jenkins' favorite things to think about and talk about and to live out. You want to talk a little bit about this notion? You mentioned it earlier that you can't just have a plan. I mean, that's good, but tell us a little bit more about your heart in this continuous improvement thought.
So I love this model because it's simple and folks can remember it very easily. It's not that complicated. This notion of improvement is not just intuitive. It's not from your gut. In K-12, public K-12 education, we have to be very careful to drive our decision making through data and to use evidence-based practices. So you can't improve what you don't see. If I don't have a model, if I don't have information in front of me, how do I know if I'm moving in the right direction? How do I know if I am improving? And so this simple model really does just drive it home. I believe Aldine School District in Texas may have been where we first saw this model. Plan, do, check, act. That means you got to have a plan. You have to document. You have to have in writing where you're aiming, where you're heading, and what your goals are. And then you need a fidelity of actual implementation. If there are needs and resources necessary to carry out that plan, we need to be religious about aligning our budget and our resources and our decisions around that plan so that you can do it with fidelity. And then there have to be checkpoints for progress monitoring. As said before, you can't wait until the end of the year and say, well, we didn't make it, sorry. You have to have checkpoints, regular checkpoints, where there's an accountability of staff and team members to track and discuss improvement. And then if there need to be some adjustments, then action has to be taken. Again, not at the end of the school year, but adjustments during the school year have to be put in place. And there has to be a sense of urgency around providing resources to adjust and course correct in order to meet the goals. And then God bless us all when we get to the end of the year and the final assessments are in, those final outcomes are in place. You start the process all over again. You plan it, you do it, you check, and then you take action to adjust again. And it just needs to be continual. And I would submit to you, it doesn't have to be exhausting. It actually should be a bit of a relief that there's an
Yes.
actual schedule and a cadence around which we have our meetings, we check our data, we make adjustments. There's a reassurance that we're headed in the right direction. Principals, teachers, everyone really wants to see students be successful and they want to do a good job. They don't have to be exhausted. There are ways around the exhaustion to make sure every student is being served. And I love this model. It's been around for some time.
Yeah, it's tried and true. Yeah, and I think, to think about those clear expectations that are communicated regularly. And if we do adjust, if we find something is not leading us in the right direction, we make those adjustments, that we have a clear communication about that. So, I think we go in and work with professional learning with districts all over the country. And if a district has not set clear goals and expectations for this work, we get more often than not people sitting on their hands and saying, I need to know what that is due when. And I mean, we just do that as human beings. We need to know where we're going and when are we expected to arrive there so that we can, align our life with that. So that does lead into this creating an intentional communication plan as part of that strategic process. And we've talked and shared about both our internal communication and what has changed or what have you emphasized a bit more, and then what external communication needed to be formalized. And Barbara, you talked about that communication with the board and how critical that is, because they're going to be talking to community members all the time and getting lots of questions and whatnot. So, Mary, talk a little bit about your recent work and really folding this into your strategic planning and the kinds of things that you guys have talked about in not only creating an intentional plan, but carrying out that communication plan.
Thank you. Yes. So as far as our MTSS plan, like I said, that was publicly presented and adopted by the Board of Education. And we provide them each year an update on the plan. Our executive director shows all the data from the dashboards, and not just the academic, how many individual student plans were made within and living on the platform, how many parent communications were on there. It wasn't just academic data. We had the social and emotional. We adopted a screener. So that's given twice a year. And most recently, we took feedback externally from our Parent Teacher Association, and they wanted a tool where they could answer a survey and have Branching Minds ingest it for us. So not only would we have the students, their responses to the social and emotional screener, parents could also give the teacher information. Then we have the district level within the district. So we do the data in front of our leadership team. Every 3 times a year, our executive director meets with each principal and goes over their data of the building, and they build the presentation together that will go to faculty. So there is the district level. Outside that, the external with the board, but then 3 times a year, there's a faculty meeting. And this is so important, not because teachers are doing the work in the classroom and they deserve to see more than once a year. This is the sum of everybody's efforts here. So, it's a way to celebrate, like, look at, we've moved the needle. And the needle doesn't always have to be a particular academic needle. Sometimes with a principal I met yesterday, his building had the highest amount of suspensions, but he does have the highest amount of special ed kids. But I said, that's a needle to look at for your staff. So report on the behavior part of the tab when you report. So the staff could feel some of the tier 1 interventions they're employing are having an effect on the entire building. And then after the faculty meeting, 3 times a year, by department or by grade level, they're meeting in smaller groups to discuss their own data as it relates to the district and the school's data. And then lastly, for students who aren't moving along as planned, they get an individual meeting with a small core group at the building level. But again, 3 times a year. So it's this constant cycle of, we've planned this plan, we did the work, but now we get to check it and do in those faculty meetings and those department meetings or grade level meetings, are discussions of what are we going to do. And that's where the students' plans are made. And they have, from Branching Minds, a very robust bank of interventions, and they apply that. And then we see what the outcome is. We had our director over this summer do work with the committee to go through the bank, because if you set a teacher into a bank of interventions and it's a morass of different interventions of which they're unfamiliar, that's way too much work for them. So they were able to discuss what are the major issues we're facing according to our data, and which interventions are we going to just direct teachers to. So they get highlighted. Our executive director highlighted it for them and made a placemat that they can just click. If you're struggling with this, click here. And it made it much more user-friendly for our teachers. And it showed our faculty, we're taking your feedback. It's a lot for you to go through and try to figure all this out. We're trying to point you more clearly in a direction that will lead to student success.
Yeah.
Mary, I love that. I love what you were able to achieve there, because part of the need for communication is really, how do you convince your teachers and your principals that this is really going to be helpful, useful to them, whether it's Branching Minds or another intervention. I have to say, when it comes to artificial intelligence and helping MTSS, I've not seen another product that does it as well as MTSS. But whatever you were trying to convince teachers about, you got to be able to start with the why. You can't just say, I'm from the central office and I'm here to make your life easier. That is not enough. Got to demonstrate to them, how is this going to help my work in the classroom? Because again, teachers are exhausted, turnover is disturbing, and certainly they have a heart for children or they wouldn't be in the profession. Teachers want to do a good job. It can just be overwhelming. And so much of the communication plan has to be, here's how it's going to actually make your life easier. I've got teacher A over here who's working hard. She's staying till 7 o'clock, trying to make sure every child is taken care of. And she still feels this frustration, this burnout, this exhaustion, because too much is getting away from her. She knows children's needs are slipping through the cracks. And then I've got teacher B over here who actually has an automated teacher assistant. Artificial intelligence can actually provide that for teachers. We have to get that message across that can help take care of some of the mundane tasks so that Teacher B's time can really be spent around enhancement of actual teaching and learning and the needs of his or her students. The difference between Teacher A and Teacher B is burnout and an exit from the profession. We have to communicate this is really going to augment what you're able to do for children without making you stay until 7 o'clock every night.
So we have a couple of resources from Branching Minds that we want to leave. One of them is a yearly timeline. I got asked over and over and over again, what should we be doing in September, in October, in January, or whatever? And so this was one of the tools that we built to just kind of prod people's thinking about what there is something going on every month. And there's several somethings actually going on. And so this might help you and might, again, kind of help you think about not only the implementation and the adoption, but also that communication plan that is so critical to keep this in the forefront of people's minds. And then we have the Superintendent's Guide to MTSS and District Strategic Planning, which we hope can give you some insight and some different things to think about as you go through this process. So those are two little freebie things that we want to give to you. We just want to thank so much Dr. O'Meara and Dr. Jenkins for taking time today. And I think the three of us have enjoyed visiting and talking a little bit and sharing practice. And it's been fun to see them get wound up about this. Their passion is real, and it gets them to the front of their seat. And I love that. So I appreciate so much getting to know you a bit better today, and just applaud your dedication to this work.
Thanks for listening to Schoolin' Around, a podcast hosted by Branching Minds. Go ahead and subscribe to our feed wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget, if you are enjoying our content, would you do us a favor and rate and review our podcast on iTunes? This helps others find our podcast and lets us know how much you love what we're creating. Branching Minds is an educational technology company using learning sciences and technology to help districts effectively personalize learning through MTSS. To learn more about us, check out our website, branchingminds.com, or follow us on Twitter, Facebook, or LinkedIn @Branching Minds.